Hello, welcome back. We're going to be doing the final challenge for freeCodeCamp Intermediate Algorithm Scripting today. It's called Arguments Optional. Um, the solution I came up with is pretty simple. However, it does require a deep understanding of what is actually happening. So I want to go over a few things with you first, and then I want to walk you through some logic, and then we'll go ahead and start coding. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we can get started here. So here is our challenge. And as you can see, I've already commented out some of the logic in it, and you can kind of see it seems a little complicated, but each one of these things only takes about a line of code or so, so it's not really long. We are going to go back and utilize this type of descriptor, and we've used it before to identify whether something was exactly a number or a Boolean value or a string, right? So that's good. So we're going to be reusing this type of constructor. We also are going to be accessing our arguments object. And let's remember that the arguments object itself is an array-like object corresponding to the arguments passed to the function. Okay, so arguments that are passed into that function, all right? And it's an array-like object, so the only thing we can really call on that are basically, I think, just length. Yep, that was a school bell. Sorry about that. So array dot or arguments dot length we can access, and we've actually used this in the past to generate variables in an actual array out of those arguments, which is something that we could do. We're not going to do that today. Also, we go in here and we're going to take a look at Boolean values, okay? And remember, we started talking more about the Boolean objects and the actual Boolean values, where anything besides 0, -0, null, false, not a number, undefined, or empty string, all right, is true. So all of that stuff is false. Anything else is true. All right, so we're going to have to remember that. So anything else evaluates to true. All right, and last, this is new. This is brand new. We're going to do, you're going to use a ternary or a conditional operator here, and all it is shortcut for if statements, okay? So instead of writing if, else, what you can do is pass this statement a condition. If the condition is true, expression 1 happens, colon, that means it's false, expression 2 happens. And what does it look like? Well, in practice here, you would have something like is member. Now, is member, that's going to be either a function or a variable, all right, that's going to evaluate to a true or a false. And then you have a question mark and saying that if this first thing before the question mark is true, do this, colon, means if it's false, then do that. Okay, so that's how we set up a ternary expression. For example, math.pi is 3.14, blah, 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 on and on. So we have a condition here that says if math.por if that's greater than 4, all right, it's a ternary is what we're using. And so say yep or nope. Since pi is smaller than 4, you would get returned with a nope, because, well, all this lives then would also equal nope. That's kind of funny, I guess. So these are all the things that we're going to be using today. This is really cool. I really like these conditionals here. They make you look really smart, your code look really sleek. So let's take a look at the problem. So what is the problem here? All right, so we're going to create a function that sums 2 arguments together. If only one argument is provided, then return a function that expects 1 argument and returns the sum. Okay, so for example, add together 2, 3. We are given 1 argument here that has 2 things in it, all right? So we just want to add those together, all right? So that should return a 5. And if we just have add together and we're only passed 1 thing here, we should return a function and that function should be looking for a second argument. Okay, so let's define what's an argument and what is the array itself. So right now, if we take a look at this example, all right, we have two arguments here. So if we look at this, however, we have one argument, which is an array-like object with something in the 0th and the first position. So let's do a little experiment. Let's just say return arguments length. Okay, let's do this. Okay, arguments.length is 2. All right, 0, 1. Okay, that's 2. So what happens if we return, it's an array-like object. So what if we return that? Oh, look, we get the number 2 because number 2 is in the 0th position. What happens if we go to the first position of this array-like object? Get 3. Okay, so this is one array-like object, okay, or one argument. That is different than one array-like object followed by another array-like object or 2 arguments. Okay, so these are 2 arguments. Each of these are an array-like argument in themselves. Okay, and so that's what's going to be important to remember. If we get something like this, okay, we want to have a function that takes this and then spits out a function that takes in this argument or the second argument and then adds them together. So let's say that one more time. What we want to do is if we find that we have an argument with only one item, we expect to have an extra argument there. Therefore, the output of this first function here, because there's only one spot in this argument, or the length of this argument is only 1, okay, we expect to see another argument later. So we want to return just a simple function. Okay, so after we take in this 2, we want to return a function that's looking for a new argument. That new argument then is going to take in, that new function that takes in this argument 3 is going to add 3 to 2. All right, let me say it another way. Let's work through my notes here and see if this makes better sense. So first thing I'm going to do is check if the argument is a number, because we have some test cases here where we have, we can get rickrolled here if we want. We have an array in here, and those should return as undefined. All right, so we want to check if the first argument is a number. All right, if one argument, all right, so if we only have one argument and it has a length of 2, so if we have one argument and it has a length of 2, okay, we just want to add both numbers. Okay, else we just want to return undefined. All right, so if they're both numbers, all right, meaning that they return they can return Boolean as true, but then so would an array and other things. So we were going to have to use that type of to make sure they're numbers. If they're both numbers, add them together. All right, else, so that's going to be 5. However, this here, since now we have a number and an array, this should return as undefined right here in our logic. Make sense? Else, the first argument has a length of 1. So here's our if, here's our else. If the argument.length equals 2 in that first argument, add them together, or one of those is an array and return undefined. Else, the first argument is going to have the length of 1 then, or at least that's what we're expecting. Okay, so either as a length of 2 or a length of 1. If it has a length of 1, then we need another if-else statement. All right, then the first argument is a number. We want to return a function. Check if this is a number. If it is a number, return a function. All right, if it's not a number, like an array or a word, just return undefined. Now, what is that function going to do? That function is going to test to make sure that the first argument is a number, which we already know, and that the second argument is also a number. All right, so it's going to take in that next argument. So it's just looking for another argument to take in and add them together. Else, something like this has happened where that second argument is an array and then return undefined. Okay, and then and here's the else for if the first argument is not a number. First and second are not both numbers, then return undefined. That's what this if else is for. Okay, and then this is the function that we're spitting out. Alrighty, so that's a lot of logic there, and let's just hop right into this. Now, this checking for a number every time is going to be repetitive, so I am just going to do a simple helper function, and I'm just going to call this var check, and I'm going to set that equal to a function, and that function is going to take in, hopefully, a number. Right, so well, hopefully it's a number. That's what we're going to test, and we're going to test if this actually is a number. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by just return and use type of. So remember, type of, lowercase o, sorry, type of, all right, is going to give us something like this: undefined object, Boolean number. Ooh, number, that's what we want. So type of, so we want exactly equal to number, right? Remember, that's our conditional. So if this is true, we're going to use a conditional statement here, where if this condition is met, then do the first thing. Colon, that means it's not true, do the second thing. So what is the first thing if it's true? Well, if it's true, okay, all right, it says return, right? So it's where we're going to return, okay. I'm just going to spit back out that number. False, we're going to spit out undefined. And let's not forget to end this sentence as well. Boom. Okay, so we have this thing that brings in what hopefully is a number and just returns that number if it passes our test. Here's our test. Here's if it passes, it just returns that num. If it fails our test, we're going to return undefined, all right, which is what we want. All right, so now every time we need to double check this, we can just call this check function. Nice and easy. The next thing that I want to do is I want to check. I'm going to call var a. Okay, I'm just going to set this to, well, I want this to check for our first case scenario where we have 2, 3. Okay, remember this 2, 3 before, where this is argument 0 and that's arguments 1. So I'll call this argument 0 and var b I'll set to arguments. Now in the when we have something where we have this where it's 2 then 3, var b is not going to have anything in this position, so it's going to return undefined anyway, so we don't have to worry about it. All right, and we won't use var b anywhere where we actually are expecting to have something in this second position, so it won't matter anyway. So we're still just going to check it. It might not be the most efficient thing in the world, but the rest of my code seems really efficient, so I'm going to keep it just like that. Okay. We could also do something with the scope and change the scope of that variable, but I'm not too worried about that right now. So the next thing I want to do is just check that this simple condition where you have two things in this array-like object that is an argument, and we're just going to add them together, right? So we can do a simple if arguments length is if it's equal to 2. All right. So if this condition is met, if it's equal to 2, use some more fancy stuff. Let's not forget that there. If, wait, don't need that. So if it's equal to 2, then I just have to add them together, right? So I just return. Remember, return is going to end our function. So we're just going to return. Now, here's the thing. What I want to do is I want to make sure that these are both numbers here. So I'm just going to say A, B. And what that's saying is if A and B are both true, and remember Boolean here, only things that are 0, null, false, empty string, anything like that are going to be false. So if there's two values, all of our options here, if it has two values, they're all numbers. So there's nothing else I have to worry about. If they made this a little more tricky, this wouldn't work, and I would have to actually call this check function on these as well. But I don't have to. I can get away with just a simple A and B. Right? If this condition is met, add A plus B. Otherwise, don't and return undefined. Undefined. Hey, that was pretty slick, right? So again, there's nothing more complex there, so this will work just fine. So if the length is 2, we know that they should both be numbers, so just double check and then add them together. If they're both true, then they're probably going to be numbers and not strings or anything, which is taking care of this case right here where this number is a string. All right, then just add them together. Otherwise, you would actually get 23 because it'd be 2 plus a string. 3 would be 2, 3, and look like 23, which is not the right thing there. All right, so else. All right, so if this is not true, this being the length being 2, that means we don't have this. It means we have something that looks like that with 2 arguments. So keep that in mind. So that's where we are in our code now. So we know we have 2 arguments. What then? Well, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we don't have anything funny going on in our syntax where this first argument here is something like a string. So we need to filter out this something being like a string or anything like that, or any other falsy value or anything other weird like undefined that could pop up from that. Okay. In order to say that, all we have to do is say if A, and if A just says as long as A comes back as true, so it's nothing like this here, just taking care of any errors or anything like that that might pop up. Although I don't think we actually need that. We could probably get through this challenge without this if checking that A this time. But I had it in there when I tested my code, so I'm going to leave it in there now. Right. So here we go. We're here now. So we've taken care of this condition here. Now we're looking at this next one where we need to return a function. All right. So we actually need to return. Why do I keep misspelling this? Return a function. Function needs to look for another argument or the next argument. So I'm actually going to call this next arg. All right. So we know that we're actually trying to suck in this next argument into our function here. And what do we want to do with this? Well, very simply, we want to make sure that these evaluate to true. All right. Now we already know that A is going to evaluate to true because it's going to be a number. So we can do return A and this is actually going to be this is not going to be the correct answer, but I'm going to show you why in a second. Arg. So I have next arg. So if these are both true, all right, then we're going to return A plus arg. So 2 plus 3, for example. Otherwise, return undefined. And again, because return is here before this conditional statement, that's how come I don't have to say return and then return here as well. Nice. And again, since so this is this, this closes the if, return undefined, this function, so we need a semicolon there, and then this is the end of the if, so now we can put our else, and I think this one is actually redundant as I'm going back through this. Undefined, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. So here is our simplified code that just takes in everything that we've written before. Let's check, and we're not going to pass. Oh no, why are we not going to pass? Well, we got a few reasons here. What are we not filtering out? We're not actually filtering out strings or anything like that right now because we're not checking this next arg. All right, we forgot to test this to make sure it was an actual number. So how do we do that? Well, we can simply call back this check function on this. Okay, so I can say check okay, so that works. And how about A and B? So this should still not pass, hopefully. Oh, good. Yes, it does not pass. What's failing here? Oh, and string here. What did we forget to do? Oh, well, look at this. If A is true, okay, well, it doesn't really help us. That's not filtering anything out. How about we do this? What happens when we check our arguments here? Okay, if we actually check here. So var A and var B, all right, we actually check them. Let's see what we get. What are we checking for? We are checking to make sure oh, I'm going to pump you up. Good. All I'm doing is checking ahead of time to filter out, making sure that they are numbers so I can filter out this string and filter out that string as well. So you can see how we kind of went and did all of our logic. We found that when we went through, certain things were passing and they shouldn't, meaning these strings, and then we modified our code on the fly. All right, and that's actually how I solved this problem, was going through and one at a time ticking off each one of these values. And so if you're going to go through and do it yourself, that's really the level that you want to get to, where you can actually work through the problem, not just find an answer, then understand the answer. Those are just good skills to have. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. And now that we've finished up this intermediate section here, we can start working on possibly the advanced section and maybe some of the projects as well. Alrighty, well, I will see you next time.